The silver chains burned like liquid fire against Luna's wrists, each link a brand of humiliation that seared both flesh and spirit. She knelt on the cold granite platform, her knees already numb from the unforgiving stone, while the underground auction hall thrummed with the predatory energy of wealthy werewolves circling their prey. The air was thick with expensive cologne, leather, and the underlying musk of barely contained animal instincts, a cocktail that made her stomach churn with revulsion and fear. 3 years, she thought desperately, her emerald eyes scanning the crowd of potential buyers. 3 years of Beta Marcus's cruelty, and now this. Her silver hair fell like a curtain around her face, offering the smallest shield against the calculating stares that stripped her bare more thoroughly than any physical examination could. The auction hall itself was a monument to wealth and power, soaring ceilings supported by marble columns, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across the assembled elite, and tapestries depicting ancient wolf hunts adorning the walls. It was beautiful in the way a spider's web was beautiful, Luna thought grimly. Designed to trap and destroy. She'd been bathed, perfumed, and dressed in a sheer white gown that left nothing to the imagination. The fabric clung to her curves like morning mist, translucent enough to reveal the network of silver scars that crisscrossed her pale skin, testament to Beta Marcus's particular brand of discipline. Each mark told a story of defiance met with punishment, of spirits slowly ground down but never quite broken. Magnificent specimens tonight, a cultured voice drawled from the front row. Luna's gaze flicked to the speaker, a distinguished alpha with salt and pepper hair and cold blue eyes. His Italian leather shoes probably cost more than most people made in a year, and his smile held all the warmth of winter moonlight. Though I must say, the silver wolf is particularly intriguing. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Luna forced herself to breathe steadily, to project the broken submissiveness that Marcus had trained into her over months of systematic abuse. Inside, her wolf paced restlessly, a caged thing that snarled against the silver that kept her animal half suppressed. The metal didn't just burn, it severed her connection to the part of herself that made her whole, leaving her feeling hollow and achingly incomplete. The auctioneer, a thin man with sharp features and sharper eyes, consulted his tablet with theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, we come now to lot 47. His voice carried easily through the hall, each word crisp with authority. "A rare silver wolf, age 24, acquired from the Crescent Moon pack after their unfortunate disbanding." Luna's chest tightened at the euphemism. There had been nothing unfortunate about the slaughter of her pack, it had been systematic, brutal, and very much intentional. But she couldn't think about that now, couldn't let the memories of blood and screaming overwhelm her when she needed every scrap of courage just to survive the next hour. "The specimen shows excellent breeding lines," the auctioneer continued, warming to his subject like a wine connoisseur discussing a particularly fine vintage. "Pure silver coat in wolf form, unusual emerald eyes, and a documented lineage tracing back to the ancient packs of the Northern Territories. She's been well trained in domestic duties and shows remarkable compliance." The word hit Luna like a physical blow. Compliance. As if her broken spirit was something to be proud of, something to advertise to potential buyers like a selling point on a piece of livestock. "Previous owner reports no disciplinary issues in the past 18 months, the auctioneer added with a meaningful look. "Excellent for labor or..." His pause was pregnant with implication. "Entertainment purposes." Luna's hands clenched involuntarily, the silver chains biting deeper into her already raw wrists. She knew exactly what kind of entertainment he meant, had seen the hungry gleam in too many eyes over the past 3 years. Beta Marcus had made it clear that her value lay not just in her rare coloring or domestic skills, but in her ability to provide certain services to discriminating buyers. The thought of another master, another set of hands that felt entitled to her body and soul, made bile rise in her throat. She'd endured Marcus because she'd had no choice, but the idea of being sold to someone potentially worse made her want to claw her way off this platform and run screaming into the night. But where would she run? Her pack was dead, her family slaughtered when she was barely 21. She had no allies, no resources, no power. The silver collar around her throat ensured that her wolf remained dormant, leaving her as vulnerable as any human in a room full of apex predators. Her emerald eyes swept the crowd again, searching desperately for something: mercy, kindness, maybe just the promise of gentler treatment. The faces that stared back at her were uniformly hard, calculating, seeing her as nothing more than a commodity to be acquired and used. Bidding will start at $1 million, the auctioneer announced, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. 1 million. The number was so far beyond her comprehension that it felt almost abstract. She was worth $1 million to these people, but only as long as she remained compliant, broken, useful. The moment she showed real defiance, the moment she tried to reclaim any piece of herself, that value would evaporate like morning dew. 1 million, called a voice from the middle of the room, a beta with cruel eyes and scarred hands who'd been eyeing her with particular interest. Luna suppressed a shudder, recognizing the type. He'd want to test her limits, see how much pain she could endure before that carefully cultivated compliance cracked. 1.2, countered another bidder, this one a female alpha with platinum blonde hair and predatory grace. At least with a female owner, certain indignities might be avoided, though Luna had learned not to make assumptions about anyone's capacity for cruelty. The bids climbed steadily, 1.5, 1.8, 2 million. Luna felt increasingly dizzy as the numbers rose, each increment another link in the chain that would bind her to a new master. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Please, she prayed silently to whatever gods might still listen to the prayers of the powerless. Please let it be someone kind. Someone who might see me as more than just a thing to be owned. 2.5 million, called a new voice, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous. Then she saw him. A massive figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the hall, and Luna's breath caught in her throat. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and harsh planes that spoke of strength and uncompromising will. But it was his eyes that made her world tilt on its axis. Golden. Pure, molten gold that seemed to burn with inner fire. She knew those eyes. She'd seen them in dreams, in half-remembered fragments of a life before the nightmare began. But that was impossible. She'd never met this man before, would certainly remember encountering someone who radiated such overwhelming presence. He was Damon Blackwood. Even Luna, isolated as she'd been for the past 3 years, knew that name. The most powerful alpha in the territory, possibly on the entire continent. He controlled more packs than any single wolf in living memory, commanded wealth that made nations envious, and was rumored to be absolutely ruthless in pursuit of his goals. He was also, according to whispered gossip, utterly heartless. They said he'd never taken a mate, showed no interest in romantic entanglements of any kind. His focus was power, pure and simple, acquiring it, wielding it, using it to expand his already considerable empire. What could he possibly want with me? Luna wondered, her mind racing even as hope and terror warred in her chest. Someone like Damon Blackwood didn't bid on slaves for entertainment or even domestic service. He had armies of employees for such mundane needs. If he was here, if he was bidding, it meant he saw some specific value in her that she couldn't begin to fathom. 3 million, called the scarred beta, his voice tight with determination. Damon's golden gaze swept over the other man with casual dismissal. For million, he said, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly hushed hall. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Other bidders shifted nervously in their seats, recognizing the implicit warning in that tone. When Damon Blackwood wanted something, wise people stepped aside. 4.5, the blonde alpha tried, but there was less confidence in her voice now. Luna watched Damon's face, searching for some clue to his motivations. His expression was carved from stone, revealing nothing of his thoughts or desires. He stood with the casual confidence of a man who'd never met a challenge he couldn't overcome, never encountered an obstacle he couldn't either circumvent or destroy. 5 million, he said simply. Silence fell like a physical weight. $5 million. The sum was staggering, far beyond what any reasonable person would pay for a slave, no matter how rare or beautiful. It was the kind of money that spoke of obsession, of need so deep and driving that cost became irrelevant. The auctioneer's eyes glittered with avarice as he scanned the crowd for competing bids. $5 million. Do I hear 5.5? Anyone? 5 million going once. Luna felt as though she was balanced on the edge of a precipice, her entire future hanging in the balance. Part of her wanted to cry out, to beg someone, anyone, to save her from this golden-eyed predator who looked at her with such unsettling intensity. But another part, a traitorous whisper deep in her soul, recognized something in those burning amber depths. Safety, her wolf murmured drowsily through the silver haze. Home. The thought was so absurd it almost made her laugh. Home. With Damon Blackwood, the most dangerous alpha in North America. She was clearly losing what remained of her sanity. 5 million going twice. Desperation clawed at Luna's throat. She had to do something, had to take some control over her fate instead of kneeling here like a sacrificial lamb waiting for the knife to fall. The words tore from her lips before she could stop them, raw and desperate and utterly without pride. Please, she called out, her voice breaking on the word. Every eye in the hall turned to her, but she only had vision for those golden depths that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Please buy me as your slave. I'll do anything. The auction hall fell into stunned silence. It was unheard of for the merchandise to speak, let alone plead with a specific bidder. Luna felt heat flood her cheeks, shame burning like acid in her veins, but she forced herself to hold Damon's gaze. She'd already destroyed what little dignity she had left, she might as well be thorough about it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Damon stepped into the light, and Luna's breath hitched as his full presence washed over her. He was magnificent in the way a storm was magnificent, beautiful, terrible, and utterly beyond mortal control. His jaw was clenched tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek as though he was fighting some internal battle. When he spoke, his voice was arctic cold, each word precision cut like a diamond. 5 million. The auctioneer's hammer fell with a sound like thunder. Sold to Mr. Blackwood. Luna was his. But as Damon approached the platform with predatory grace, Luna saw something flicker in those golden depths, something that made her pulse skip and her breath catch. For just an instant, his mask of cold control slipped, revealing something raw and hungry and achingly familiar. Was it recognition? The thought sent electricity racing through her veins even as Damon reached the platform. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, heat and power and barely leashed wildness wrapped in an expensive suit. When their eyes met, Luna felt something shift deep in her chest, some long-dormant part of her soul stirring to wakefulness. Who are you? She wanted to ask. And why do I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you to find me? But those were dangerous thoughts, foolish hopes that would only lead to more pain. She was a slave who'd just been bought by the most powerful alpha in the territory. Whatever that flicker in his eyes meant, it couldn't possibly be what her heart desperately wanted it to be. Could it? Chapter 2. The Blackwood estate rose from the misty landscape like something out of a Gothic fairy tale, all soaring towers and ancient stone that spoke of power accumulated over centuries. Luna pressed her face to the window of Damon's sleek black Mercedes, her breath fogging the glass as iron gates adorned with prowling wolf silhouettes swung open to admit them. The driveway stretched for what seemed like miles, winding through manicured gardens where moonflowers bloomed pale and ghostly in the darkness. This is where I'll live now, she thought, the reality of her situation hitting her like a physical blow. Or where I'll die, if I displease him. She sat rigidly in the passenger seat, hyper-aware of the man beside her who commanded this fortress and everything in it. Damon had barely spoken during the drive from the auction house, his hands steady on the wheel while classical music played softly through the speakers. Mozart, she realized with surprise, not what she'd expected from someone with his reputation for ruthlessness. The silver collar around her throat felt different now, though she couldn't quite explain how. It still burned, still cut her off from her wolf, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache rather than the searing agony she'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. When Damon had removed the chains at the auction house, his touch had been gentle. Clinical, yes, but without the casual cruelty she'd learned to expect from powerful hands. Don't read too much into it, she warned herself sternly. Kindness is just another form of control. Marcus taught you that. The car pulled to a stop before massive oak doors that looked like they could withstand a siege. Damon was out and opening her door before she could even reach for the handle, his movements fluid and predatory despite the civilized veneer of his expensive suit. "Come," he said simply, offering her his arm. Luna stared at the extended limb as though it might bite her. In her experience, when men offered assistance, it came with strings attached, obligations that would be called in later with interest. But refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting, so she placed her trembling fingers on his forearm and allowed him to escort her up the marble steps. The moment she crossed the threshold, Luna's breath caught in her throat. The entrance hall was magnificent, soaring ceiling supported by columns of black marble veined with gold, a chandelier that looked like captured starlight, and floors polished to mirror brightness that reflected their every step. But it was the portraits that made her stumble. Wolves. Dozens of them, captured in oils that seemed to gleam with inner life. They lined the walls in ornate frames, generations of Blackwood ancestors staring down with golden eyes that all bore an uncanny resemblance to the man beside her. Some were painted in human form, regal men and women in clothing that spanned centuries of fashion. Others showed magnificent wolves in their animal glory, all dark-furred and powerful, rulers of whatever domain they'd claimed. "Your family?" Luna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 700 years of Blackwood history, Damon confirmed, his tone carrying a weight of legacy that made her feel suddenly small and insignificant. "Every alpha who ruled before me, every Luna who stood beside them." Luna. The word sent an odd little shiver through her, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was simply the reminder of what she was, or rather, what she'd been before Silver Chains and Beta Marcus's cruel training had stripped away everything that made her more than human. They walked in silence through halls that seemed to stretch on forever, past rooms filled with priceless antiques and artwork that belonged in museums. Luna tried to memorize the layout, a survival instinct honed by 3 years of needing to know every possible escape route, but the estate was vast enough to get lost in for days. "You're not what I expected," Damon said quietly as they climbed a sweeping staircase toward the upper floors. Luna nearly stumbled again, this time from surprise rather than awe. She'd assumed he would treat her like the piece of property he'd just purchased, perhaps acknowledge her existence when he had use for her, but otherwise ignore her completely. The fact that he was not only speaking to her but sharing observations felt surreal. "What did you expect?" she asked, then immediately cursed herself for the question. Slaves shouldn't be curious about their master's thoughts. It was safer to remain silent, invisible, unremarkable. But Damon didn't seem angered by her boldness. If anything, his expression softened slightly as those golden eyes met hers. "Someone broken," he said, his voice carrying notes of something she couldn't quite identify. "Regret? Disappointment? You're not broken. You're fighting." Fighting. Luna wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She was wearing a silver collar, had begged to be bought like livestock, and was now being led through the halls of her new prison like a lamb to slaughter. If this was fighting, she was doing a spectacularly poor job of it. "I'm not fighting anything," she said carefully. "I'm exactly what the auctioneer advertised, compliant, well-trained, suitable for whatever purpose my owner requires." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but they were the ones that had kept her alive for 3 years. Better to be seen as broken than to invite the kind of corrective measures that Marcus had favored. Damon stopped walking so abruptly that Luna nearly collided with him. When he turned to face her, his expression was thunderous, though she didn't think the anger was directed at her. "Your previous owner," he said, each word carefully controlled. "What did he do to make you think those are the words you need to survive?" The question hit like a physical blow, stripping away the careful numbness she'd cultivated. For a moment, Luna was back in Marcus's house, kneeling on cold floors while he explained exactly what would happen if she showed too much spirit, if she forgot her place, if she made the mistake of thinking she was anything more than a possession to be used as he saw fit. She swallowed hard, forcing the memories back into their carefully constructed cage. "I don't know what you mean." Damon studied her face with unsettling intensity, as though he could read every thought she was trying to hide. "We'll discuss it later," he said finally. "When you're ready." "When you're ready." As if she had a choice in the matter. as if her readiness was something that mattered to him. They continued up the stairs and down another seemingly endless corridor lined with more portraits and priceless artwork. Luna's feet were beginning to ache in the ridiculous heels they'd forced her to wear at the auction, but she didn't dare complain. Damon's legs were much longer than hers, and she had to take 2 steps for every one of his, but he didn't seem to notice her struggle to keep pace. Finally, he stopped before an ornate door made of some dark wood that gleamed like satin in the hallway's crystal sconces. "This is your room," he said, pushing it open and stepping aside to let her enter first. Luna crossed the threshold and immediately froze. She'd been expecting a cell, maybe a servant's quarters if she was lucky, a basement room with bars on the windows if she wasn't. What she found instead defied every assumption she'd made about her situation. The bedroom was larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with her parents before the pack's destruction. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in silk the color of moonlight and piled high with pillows that looked like clouds. Persian rugs covered gleaming hardwood floors, while tall windows offered views of gardens that stretched toward distant mountains. There was a fireplace with a marble mantel, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, and a sitting area with furniture that looked antique and impossibly expensive. It was beautiful. It was luxurious. It was everything she'd never dared dream of having. It was also clearly a guest room, not a servant's quarters. I don't understand," Luna said, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm your slave." Damon paused in the doorway, his hand resting on the brass handle. Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to catch but profound enough to change his entire expression for a heartbeat. "No, Luna," he said quietly. "You're free." The words hit her like a thunderbolt. Free? That was impossible. She'd been bought and paid for, had the bill of sale to prove it. $5 million changed hands specifically to purchase her body and her obedience. There had to be a catch, some hidden condition that would reveal itself once she'd lowered her guard. But the real shock came with his next words. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. The auctioneer had referred to her only as the specimen and Lot 47. Marcus had called her girl or worse, never bothering to learn what her parents had named her. Even the paperwork had listed her simply as silver female, pack designation revoked. She'd begun to think her name had died with her family, just another casualty of the massacre that had stolen everything else from her. Yet Damon Blackwood, the most powerful alpha in the territory, had spoken it like he'd known it his entire life. For a moment, she thought he might answer. His golden eyes searched her face with that same unsettling intensity, as though looking for something he'd lost and desperately hoped to find. But then his expression shuddered, becoming the impenetrable mask she was beginning to recognize. "Get some rest," he said instead. "The collar comes off tomorrow." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded as final as the lid of a coffin. Luna stood frozen in the center of the magnificent room, her mind reeling from the impossibility of the last few minutes. Free? The collar removed? A bedroom fit for royalty instead of chains in a basement? "It's a trap," her rational mind insisted. "It has to be. Men like him don't spend $5 million on slaves just to set them free." But her heart, the foolish, hopeful thing that 3 years of abuse hadn't quite managed to destroy, whispered something different. Something dangerous. What if it's real? What if he means it? Luna shook her head violently, dispelling the treacherous thought. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness that would only lead to greater pain when reality inevitably reasserted itself. Better to expect the worst and be pleasantly surprised than to dare believe in kindness that would be snatched away. She explored the room systematically, checking for hidden cameras or listening devices, testing the windows to see if they were locked. They weren't, another impossibility in a night full of them. The bathroom was equally magnificent, all marble and gold fixtures with a tub large enough to swim in and towels soft as cloud. Clean clothes had been laid out on the bed, not the servant's garb she'd expected, but jeans and a cashmere sweater in forest green that would complement her unusual coloring. They looked expensive and, more surprisingly, like they would actually fit her properly. How did he know my size? How did he know anything about me? The questions multiplied with each passing moment, but Luna forced herself to focus on immediate needs. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, hadn't had a proper bath in longer than she cared to remember. If this was all some elaborate game, at least she could face whatever came next clean and fed. The bath was a revelation: hot water that didn't run out after 5 minutes, soap that smelled like lavender instead of harsh chemicals, shampoo that left her silver hair gleaming like spun moonlight. She stayed in the tub until her fingers pruned, letting the heat leach some of the tension from muscles that had been clenched tight for years. When she finally emerged and dressed in the mysteriously perfect clothes, Luna felt almost human again. The silver collar still burned against her throat, still cut her off from the wolf that prowled restlessly in the depths of her soul, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt like something more than a broken thing to be used and discarded. That was when she found it. She'd been exploring the room more thoroughly, running her fingers over the spines of books she hadn't dared touch earlier, when her hand brushed against something wedged between 2 leather volumes. A photograph, creased and yellowed with age, fluttered to the floor. Luna's knees gave out as she stared at the image, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Her parents smiled back at her from the faded print, her father with his kind eyes and gentle smile, her mother radiant in a way that spoke of deep contentment and love. They were younger than she remembered them, perhaps only a few years older than Luna was now, standing in what looked like a garden party or PAX celebration. But it was the third figure in the photograph that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. A boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, stood between her parents with their hands resting protectively on his shoulders. His dark hair was mussed as though he'd been running, his clothes were grass-stained from play, and his smile was bright with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. But his eyes were pure molten gold, ancient and knowing even in such a young face. Luna's hands shook so violently that the photograph nearly fluttered to the floor again. It was impossible. It had to be some kind of coincidence, some trick of light or resemblance that her desperate mind was twisting into significance. But even as she told herself that, she knew the truth with bone-deep certainty. The boy in the photograph, the child her parents had looked at with such obvious affection, was Damon Blackwood. "How do you know my name?" Now she understood why that question had felt so important, why his recognition of her had sent electricity racing through her veins. They'd met before, long before the auction house and silver chains and desperate pleas. But if that was true, if they'd known each other as children, then why didn't she remember? And more importantly, why had he let her suffer for 3 years before coming to find her? If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. Luna had barely slept. The photograph lay on her nightstand like an accusation, its faded edges catching the first rays of dawn that filtered through the tall windows. She'd stared at it for hours, memorizing every detail, her father's protective stance, her mother's radiant smile, and most disturbing of all, the way young Damon's golden eyes seemed to hold secrets far too heavy for a child to bear. He knew them. He knew me. The realization had churned in her stomach all night, mixing with equal parts hope and betrayal. If Damon had known her family, if they'd been close enough for that kind of intimate photograph, then why had she spent 3 years in hell? Why hadn't he come for her sooner? By the time the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7, Luna had made her decision. She couldn't live with the questions burning holes in her consciousness. Whatever the truth was, however much it might hurt, she needed to know. The silver collar still circled her throat, but true to his word, it felt different this morning. The burning had dulled to a barely perceptible warmth, and for the first time in 3 years, she could sense her wolf stirring in the depths of her soul. Not enough to shift, not enough to access her full strength, but enough to remind her that she was more than the broken creature Marcus had tried to create. She dressed carefully in the clothes that had mysteriously fit her perfectly, jeans that hugged her curves without being restrictive, a cream-colored sweater that was softer than anything she'd ever owned. Looking at herself in the ornate mirror, Luna barely recognized the woman staring back. Clean, well-dressed, with eyes that held a spark of defiance she'd thought long extinguished. Maybe that's why he said I wasn't broken, she mused, running her fingers through hair that gleamed like spun silver in the morning light. Maybe he can see something I've forgotten how to see in myself. Finding Damon's study required asking directions from a kind-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Chin, who seemed genuinely pleased to see Luna up and about. The woman's warmth was so unexpected that Luna found herself fighting back tears. When was the last time someone had smiled at her without wanting something in return? The alpha is usually in his office by 6:30, Mrs. Chin explained, her slight accent adding musical notes to her words. He's an early riser. Coffee's always fresh if you'd like some, dear. Dear. Such a simple word, but it hit Luna like a physical caress. She'd been girl, or it, or worse for so long that casual kindness felt foreign, almost dangerous. The study door was massive oak, carved with the same prowling wolves that adorned the estate's gates. Luna raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Once she crossed this threshold, once she demanded answers, there would be no going back to the comfortable numbness that had protected her for 3 years. But I can't live in numbness forever, she realized. If I'm truly free, I need to understand what freedom means. She knocked. Come in. Damon's voice carried through the heavy wood, and Luna pushed the door open to reveal a room that was quintessentially masculine, dark wood paneling, leather-bound books climbing to a coffered ceiling, and massive windows that overlooked the estate's sprawling grounds. Damon sat behind a desk that could have served as a dining table for 6, his attention focused on a laptop screen and scattered papers that looked like financial reports. He'd traded his expensive suit for more casual attire, dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and made his golden eyes seem to glow with inner fire. His hair was slightly mussed as though he'd been running his fingers through it, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested his sleep had been as troubled as hers. Good, Luna thought with a spark of vindictive satisfaction. He should be troubled. He has explaining to do. Luna. He looked up as she entered, and something indefinable shifted in his expression. Relief? Wariness? How did you sleep? I didn't, she said bluntly, crossing the room with more confidence than she actually felt. The photograph crackled in her grip, its edges cutting into her palm. We need to talk. Damon's eyes immediately went to the photo in her hands, and his entire body went rigid. The mask of controlled indifference he wore like armor began to crack, revealing glimpses of something raw and vulnerable underneath. Where did you find that? His voice was carefully modulated, but Luna caught the underlying tension. Hidden in the books in my room. She stepped closer to his desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. Which raises some interesting questions, don't you think? For a long moment, they stared at each other across the expanse of polished wood. Luna could practically see him calculating responses, weighing how much truth to reveal. The careful consideration in his golden gaze made her want to scream. You knew them, she said, abandoning subtlety for direct confrontation. The photograph trembled in her hands as 3 years of suppressed emotion threatened to boil over. You knew my parents. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered completely. Damon's face went through a dozen expressions in the space of a heartbeat: grief, guilt, longing, and something that looked almost like relief. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. Your parents died protecting Pack's secrets, he said, each word carefully measured. I was there that night. There. The simple word hit Luna like a physical blow. He'd been there during the massacre that had destroyed everything she'd ever loved, had stolen her family and her innocence and her entire world. The photograph fluttered from her suddenly nerveless fingers as the full implications crashed over her. You were there? Her voice rose to nearly a shout, the careful control she'd maintained for 3 years finally snapping. Then why didn't you save them? Why didn't you save me? Damon flinched as though she'd struck him, but he didn't look away from her accusation. Because I was 8 years old and hiding in a closet while rogues tore through our shared pack house. The words were raw with self-recrimination, delivered with the weight of 15 years of survivor's guilt. Luna stared at him as the timeline rearranged itself in her mind. 8 years old. He'd been just a child, as helpless as she'd been at 9. Whatever power and authority he wielded now, that night he'd been as vulnerable as any human child caught in a nightmare. Your father found me, Damon continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Blood on his hands, tears on his face. He pulled me out of that closet and told me to run. To survive. His last words were about protecting his daughter. Protecting his daughter. Luna's legs gave out as the full weight of revelation crashed over her. Her father's final thoughts hadn't been of his own pain or fear, they'd been of her. Of making sure she was safe, even as his world burned around him. Strong arms caught her before she could hit the floor, pulling her against a broad chest that smelled of sandalwood and something uniquely male. Damon's embrace was careful but secure, offering comfort without demanding anything in return. Luna should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance that had kept her safe for so long, but she was drowning in 15-year-old grief and desperately needed an anchor. "I've been looking for you for 15 years, he whispered into her silver hair, his breath warm against her scalp. "When I heard your voice at that auction, calling my name. I knew." Luna's head snapped up so quickly she nearly clipped his chin. "I never called your name," she said, confusion mixing with the cocktail of emotions already churning in her chest. "I didn't even know who you were until someone whispered it in the crowd." Damon pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his golden eyes intense with conviction. "Luna, you said, please, Damon, buy me as your slave. You spoke directly to me, used my name. That's when I knew for certain it was you." The words hit her like ice water. She replayed the moment in her mind, the desperation, the crowd of hostile faces, the golden-eyed stranger who'd seemed like her only hope. But in her memory, she'd simply called out to him, begging any powerful alpha to save her from worse fates. "I never said your name," she repeated, but even as the words left her lips, doubt crept in. The entire night was a blur of terror and adrenaline. Could she have said something she didn't remember? "You don't remember," Damon said, and it wasn't a question. His eyes searched her face with growing concern. "What else don't you remember, Luna?" That was the question she'd been dreading, the one that had haunted her sleepless nights for months. Luna pulled away from his embrace and began pacing the length of his study, her mind racing through fragmented memories that never quite fit together properly. "I remember the attack," she said, her voice hollow. "Screaming, blood, the smell of smoke. I remember running through the forest, hiding until morning. But after that..." She pressed her palms against her temples as though she could physically force the memories to surface. "The next clear memory I have is being in Marcus's custody. Everything between is fuzzy." "How long were you missing?" Damon's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the barely leashed fury underneath. "Marcus said he found me 3 days after the attack, wandering the highways in shock." Luna's pacing intensified as more questions bubbled to the surface. "But if you were looking for me, how did he find me first? How did he even know to look?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Luna turned to face Damon, his expression had gone thunderous, his hands clenched into fists that looked capable of tearing apart anyone who threatened what he protected. "He didn't find you," Damon said, his voice deadly quiet. "He took you." The accusation hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Luna felt her world tilt on its axis as the implications crashed over her. If Marcus had taken her rather than rescued her, if he'd deliberately kept her from whoever might have been looking. "But the official reports," she whispered. "The pack investigators said I was the only survivor, that my body was never found because someone made sure it looked that way." Damon's golden eyes blazed with barely contained violence. "Someone who wanted you to disappear completely, who needed you isolated and helpless." Luna sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her mind reeling. "Why? I was just a child. I had no power, no influence. What could anyone possibly want with a 9-year-old orphan?" Damon's expression grew even more grim. "That's what I intend to find out. But first, we need to figure out what else you've forgotten." He moved around the desk to kneel in front of her chair, his hands covering hers with gentle warmth. "Luna, I think someone has been deliberately suppressing your memories. The gaps you're describing, the way you can't remember using my name, that's not natural trauma response." "You think I've been drugged?" The idea should have been shocking, but it actually explained so much. The persistent fog that clouded her thoughts, the way certain memories slipped away like water whenever she tried to grasp them, the strange compliance that had kept her docile for 3 years. I think someone has been very carefully controlling what you remember and what you forget. Damon's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. The question is why? Luna stared into his golden eyes and felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went bone deep, as though her soul was finally remembering something her mind had been forced to forget. I know him, she realized with startling clarity. I've always known him. That's why his eyes seemed familiar, why his voice made something inside me stir to life. We were friends, she said suddenly, the words emerging from some buried place in her memory. As children. We played together. Damon's face transformed, years of careful control dissolving into something raw and hopeful. You remember. Pieces, Luna admitted, pressing her free hand to her forehead as fragments of golden afternoons and childhood laughter flickered through her mind. Not everything, but, yes. We were friends. More than friends, something whispered in the depths of her consciousness. Much more than friends. But that particular memory remained tantalizingly out of reach, blocked by the same fog that had stolen so much of her past. We're going to figure this out, Damon promised, his voice fierce with determination. Whatever was done to you, whoever took your memories, we're going to fix it. Luna nodded, feeling something that might have been hope stirring in her chest for the first time in years. But even as she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of answers, of justice, of reclaimed memories, a darker thought crept in. If someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to steal her memories and hide her from those who cared about her, they wouldn't give up easily. And if they discovered that Damon had found her, that the carefully constructed prison of forgetfulness was beginning to crumble, what would they do to keep their secrets safe? Chapter 4. Dr. Sarah Chin arrived at the Blackwood estate within the hour, her medical bag in one hand and a leather satchel thick with ancient texts in the other. Luna had met the pack physician briefly the night before, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands who radiated the sort of calm competence that came from decades of healing both bodies and souls. I've been the Blackwood pack physician for 20 years, Dr. Chin explained as she set up her equipment in Damon's study. But before that, I studied under the old healers in the Northern Territories. Some knowledge can only be passed down through oral tradition. Luna perched nervously on the edge of the leather sofa, hyper-aware of Damon's protective presence beside her. He hadn't left her side since her near collapse earlier, positioning himself close enough to catch her if the revelations became too overwhelming. The gesture should have felt possessive, controlling. Instead, it felt like safety. Tell me about your symptoms, Dr. Chin said, pulling out a small penlight. Not just the physical ones, the mental and emotional patterns too. Luna found herself describing things she'd never told anyone. The persistent fog that clouded her thoughts, the way certain memories slipped away like smoke whenever she tried to grasp them, the bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. As she spoke, Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly grim. Look at me, please, the doctor instructed, shining the penlight into Luna's eyes. The beam was surprisingly bright, and Luna instinctively tried to pull away, but Dr. Chen's grip was gentle but firm. Just for a moment longer. The light felt like it was burning straight through to her brain, illuminating corners that had been shrouded in darkness for years. Luna blinked rapidly when Dr. Chin finally switched off the penlight, seeing spots of color dancing across her vision. Memory suppression, Dr. Chin confirmed, her tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Someone's been dosing her with refined wolfsbane for years. It explains the silver sensitivity too. Wolfsbane. Luna's stomach dropped as the pieces clicked into place. She'd always assumed her violent reactions to silver were simply part of her wolf nature, albeit more extreme than most. The thought that someone had been deliberately poisoning her, systematically weakening her for years, made bile rise in her throat. Damon's hands clenched into fists, the sound of cracking knuckles unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Who would do this to her? The question was barely human, more growl than words. Dr. Chen's expression was carved from granite. Someone who wanted her to forget her true nature. Someone who needed her weak, compliant, and cut off from her power. She paused, meeting Damon's golden gaze with steady resolve. Alpha, I need to tell you something else. Luna's not just any wolf. Luna felt a chill of premonition crawl up her spine. Dr. Chen reached into her leather satchel and withdrew an ancient journal, its cover cracked with age and use. The leather was so old it had turned nearly black, and symbols Luna didn't recognize were burned into its surface. According to this, Dr. Chen said, opening the journal with reverential care, she's the last of the Moonfire bloodline. The words hit the room like a physical force. Luna saw Damon go perfectly still beside her, his breathing carefully controlled in a way that suggested he was fighting for composure. That's impossible, Luna whispered, staring at the journal as though it might bite her. The Moonfire line died out generations ago. Dr. Chen's finger traced delicate script that looked like it had been written with silver ink. Your grandmother was Elena Moonfire, the most powerful Luna in werewolf history. She could heal with a touch, communicate with wolves across vast distances, and her very presence could calm the most savage beast. The doctor looked up, her eyes intense with conviction. That power runs in bloodlines, Luna. It's not something that simply disappears. Luna's world tilted on its axis. Elena Moonfire was legend, the Luna who had united warring packs, who had ended the Great Wolf Wars through sheer force of will and supernatural ability. Children grew up hearing stories about her power, her wisdom, her ultimate sacrifice to save her people. That's impossible, Luna repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. Deep in her bones, something was stirring, a recognition that felt older than memory, deeper than knowledge. I'm weak, she continued desperately. I can barely shift. I have no power, no special abilities. I'm just. Because you've been poisoned, Damon interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. The fury radiating from him was so intense that Luna could feel it like heat against her skin. Your former owner knew exactly what you were. The implications crashed over Luna like a tidal wave. Marcus hadn't simply stumbled upon a convenient slave, he'd specifically targeted her, stolen her, systematically weakened her for his own purposes. Every dose of silver, every cruel punishment, every moment of degradation had been calculated to strip away not just her dignity, but her very essence. Oh God, she breathed, pressing her hands to her temples as fragments of suppressed memory began forcing their way to the surface. He said when I turned 25, I'd finally be useful for something other than housework. Dr. Chen and Damon exchanged a look heavy with meaning. When is your birthday, Luna? The doctor asked gently. 3 days, Luna whispered, and watched both their faces pale. My birthday is in 3 days. Suddenly, the memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. Not everything, the wolfsbane had done too much damage for complete recall, but enough. Enough to remember Marcus's visits to her cell in those final weeks, his excited discussions with shadowy figures about the ritual and claiming the power. Enough to remember overhearing phone conversations about bloodlines and ancient magic and the specific timing required for a successful transfer. He's going to try to steal my power, Luna gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush of horrified understanding. On my birthday. That's when Luna powers traditionally manifest fully. He's been keeping me weak so I couldn't fight back when she couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the violation Marcus had planned. Damon, she turned to him desperately, Marcus will come for me. He spent too much time and effort setting this up to just let me go. He'll come, and he'll. Let him come, Damon growled, his alpha aura suddenly filling the room like a living thing. The air itself seemed to thicken with power, and Luna felt her suppressed wolf lift its head in recognition of a true alpha's dominance. I've been wanting to have a conversation with Beta Marcus about his treatment of what's mine. What's mine? The possessive words should have triggered Luna's fight or flight response, should have reminded her of Marcus's casual ownership of her body and soul. Instead, they felt like a promise, not of ownership, but of protection. Dr. Chen cleared her throat delicately. There's something else you both need to know. She turned several pages in the ancient journal, stopping at a passage written in the same silver ink. According to the old records, Luna powers are strongest when channeled through a mate bond. The Moonfire line in particular was known for choosing their mates early and maintaining those bonds throughout their lives. Luna felt heat creep up her neck as the implications became clear. Dr. Chen was suggesting that not only was she some legendary bloodline, but that her power would be amplified by Luna, Damon said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that made something deep in her chest flutter to life. Look at me. She turned to meet his golden gaze and felt the world shift around them. There was something in his eyes, recognition, longing, and an emotion so deep and profound that it took her breath away. We're mates, he said simply, taking her hands in his. We were promised to each other as children, before the attack. Your wolf has been calling to mind this whole time. The words should have been shocking, impossible, too much to process on top of everything else she'd learned. Instead, they felt like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. The instant recognition at the auction house, the way her body responded to his presence, the bone-deep certainty that she was safe with him, it all made sense now. I don't remember, Luna whispered, but even as she said it, she could feel her wolf stirring in the depths of her consciousness. For the first time in years, the silver collar wasn't burning against her throat. Instead, it felt almost loose. You will, Damon promised, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. As the wolfsbane leaves your system, as your power returns, the memories will come back too. Luna stared into his golden eyes and felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that transcended memory, that lived in her bones and blood and the very core of her being. Her wolf, so long suppressed and silenced, lifted its head and howled with joy. Mate, the word echoed through her consciousness with the force of absolute truth. Home. Safety. Completion. I can feel it, she breathed, wonder replacing the fear that had dominated her thoughts moments before. I can feel my wolf. Damon's face transformed, years of careful control dissolving into pure relief and joy. She's been waiting for you to come home, he said softly. We both have. Dr. Chen smiled from her position across the room, but her expression remained serious. The mate bond will help accelerate her healing, but it won't be instantaneous. And if Marcus is planning to make his move in 3 days, then we need to be ready, Damon finished, his voice hardening back into alpha command mode. How long before Luna's power fully manifests? Hard to say, Dr. Chen admitted. It depends on how much damage the wolfsbane has done, how quickly her system can purge the toxins. With the mate bond to anchor her, possibly by tomorrow night. Definitely by her birthday. Luna felt a thrill of something that might have been anticipation race through her veins. After years of being weak, helpless, at the mercy of those stronger than herself, the thought of reclaiming her power was intoxicating. But it was also terrifying. What if I can't control it? She asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Dr. Chen first mentioned her bloodline. The stories about Elena Moonfire, her power was immense. What if I hurt someone? What if I hurt you? Damon's hands tightened on hers, his golden eyes blazing with absolute conviction. You won't, he said simply. I'll be here to anchor you, to help you learn control. We'll face whatever comes together. Together. Luna had been alone for so long that the word felt foreign, dangerous, too good to be true. But as she looked into Damon's eyes, as she felt her wolf pressing against the barriers that had confined it for years, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just finally ready to remember who she'd always been meant to be. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Chapter 5. The transformation began at sunset. Luna stood before the full-length mirror in her room, watching in fascination as her body literally changed before her eyes. As the wolfsbane left her system, purged by Dr. Chen's careful treatment and the strengthening mate bond, every cell seemed to come alive with new energy. Her silver hair, which had always been beautiful but somehow muted, now gleamed with an ethereal light that seemed to come from within. Each strand caught and reflected the evening light like spun moonbeams, creating an almost otherworldly aura around her face. Her emerald eyes sparkled with newfound power, no longer dulled by chemical suppression but bright and fierce with the intelligence and strength that had been locked away for so long. But it was more than just physical changes. Luna could feel her wolf pressing against the barriers that had confined it for years, no longer a distant whisper but a vibrant presence that filled her with completion she'd forgotten was possible. The silver collar around her throat had finally fallen away that morning, crumbling to dust the moment her power reached a critical threshold. This is who I was always meant to be, she thought, running her fingers through hair that seemed to shimmer with its own light. This is who Marcus tried to steal from me. A soft knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. Luna? Damon's voice carried through the wood, carefully controlled but tinged with something that might have been awe. May I come in? Of course, she called, turning from the mirror to face him as he entered. The breath left Damon's lungs in a rush. Luna had been beautiful before, even broken and suppressed, her natural radiance had shone through. But now, with her power awakening and the mate bond strengthening between them, she was luminous. She looked like what she was, a Luna born to rule, a daughter of the most powerful bloodline in werewolf history. You're magnificent, he said simply, his golden eyes drinking in every detail of her transformation. Luna felt heat bloom in her cheeks, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from shame or fear. The way Damon looked at her, with reverence, desire, and profound love, made her feel powerful in ways that had nothing to do with supernatural ability. I want to try shifting, she said, surprised by the confidence in her own voice. I haven't been able to for so long, but I can feel her now. My wolf. She's ready. Damon nodded, moving to the tall windows that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the estate's gardens. The grounds are secure. Take all the time you need. Luna stepped onto the stone balcony, breathing deeply of the cool evening air that carried the scents of pine and wildflowers. The full moon hung heavy and silver in the darkening sky, its light seeming to call to something primal in her blood. Let go, she told herself, closing her eyes and reaching for the transformation that had been denied to her for so long. Remember who you are. The shift came more easily than it had even before the wolfsbane poisoning, as though her wolf was eager to finally stretch muscles that had been cramped for years. Bones lengthened and reformed, muscles expanded and strengthened, and her senses exploded with new acuity. When Luna opened her eyes, she was looking at the world through wolf vision, sharper, more detailed, alive with scents and sounds that her human form could never detect. She looked down at her paws and felt a surge of pure joy. Her wolf was magnificent. Pure silver from nose to tail, with a coat that seemed to gleam with inner moonlight. She was larger than most female wolves, nearly the size of an alpha male, with elegant lines that spoke of both speed and strength. But it was her eyes that were truly extraordinary, the same emerald green as her human form, but now glowing with power that was unmistakably supernatural. Beautiful, Damon breathed from the doorway, and Luna turned to see that he had shifted as well. His wolf was massive, nearly black with golden eyes that blazed like fire in the moonlight. Even in wolf form, his alpha presence was overwhelming, a creature born to lead, to protect, to dominate. But when he looked at her, there was no dominance in his gaze. Only wonder, and love, and a recognition that went soul deep. Luna padded toward him, her wolf moving with a grace she'd forgotten she possessed. When they touched, muzzle to muzzle in the ancient greeting between mates, electricity sparked between them. The mate bond, which had been growing stronger all day, suddenly blazed to life with an intensity that took her breath away. Mine, her wolf sang with joy. Finally mine. They shifted back to human form in perfect synchronization, and Luna found herself in Damon's arms before she'd even fully completed the transformation. His hands tangled in her silver hair, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion so profound it made her chest ache. I've waited 15 years to see you like this, he whispered against her lips. Whole. Powerful. Free. But their moment of peace was interrupted by the sharp sound of footsteps in the hallway. Jake, Damon's beta, appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Luna's newly awakened instincts scream danger. Alpha, Jake said grimly, his usual easy demeanor replaced by grim efficiency. We have a problem. Marcus has assembled an army of rogues. They're surrounding the territory. The joy of transformation and mate recognition vanished, replaced by cold dread. Luna had known this moment would come, but experiencing her power for the first time had made her forget, temporarily, that Marcus wouldn't simply accept its loss. How many? Damon asked, his voice shifting into Alpha command mode as he stepped protectively in front of Luna. At least 50, possibly more. They're positioned at every border crossing, and our scouts report more arriving every hour. Jake's expression was troubled. Alpha, some of these rogues, they're not natural. There's something wrong with their scent, their behavior. It's like they've been enhanced somehow. Luna felt ice form in her stomach. Enhanced rogues meant dark magic, blood rituals, the kind of supernatural manipulation that twisted wolves into something monstrous. Marcus hadn't just assembled an army, he'd created an abomination. He can't have my power if I'm mated, Luna said suddenly, the knowledge rising from some deep well of inherited wisdom. The binding ritual would protect us both. Once the mate bond is complete, my power becomes shared between us. He couldn't steal it without killing you first. Damon turned to face her, his golden eyes intense with consideration. The moon is full tonight, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. The timing would be perfect for a mating ritual. But Luna. His voice softened, became almost uncertain. Are you sure? Once we complete the bond, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me for life, and right now, I'm asking you to make that choice in the middle of a crisis rather than. I've been yours since I was 10 years old, Damon, Luna interrupted, stepping closer to him until they were breathing the same air. I just forgot. The words came from her heart, from the part of her that had recognized him the moment she'd seen his golden eyes at the auction. The mate bond had been there all along, waiting patiently through years of separation and suppression for them to find each other again. Luna, Damon breathed her name like a prayer, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. When their lips met, the world exploded into light and sensation. The mate bond, which had been a warm presence in the back of Luna's consciousness, suddenly blazed to life with the force of a star being born. Silver light danced around them, visible even to human eyes, as power that had been building for 15 years finally found its outlet. Luna felt Damon's strength flowing into her, felt her own power wrapping around him in return. They were still separate beings, but also something more, two halves of a whole that had finally found completion. The ritual wasn't finished yet, wouldn't be complete until they'd made their vows under the full moon, but the bond was strong enough now to offer protection. Strong enough to make her truly dangerous to anyone who threatened her mate. The moment of perfect connection was shattered by an explosion that shook the entire estate. Windows rattled in their frames, and Luna heard the distant sound of screaming from somewhere in the gardens. They're here, Jake shouted over the chaos, his hand already on his weapon. Marcus is attacking. Through the smoke and confusion that poured through the shattered windows, a familiar sound echoed across the grounds, cruel laughter that made Luna's blood run cold with remembered terror. Did you really think hiding her would work, Blackwood? Marcus's voice carried impossible distances, enhanced by the same dark magic that had created his army of rogues. She belongs to me. I've spent too much time and effort breaking her to let some upstart alpha steal what's mine. Luna felt power surge through her veins, no longer the helpless slave who had cowered before Marcus's cruelty, but a Luna awakening to her birthright. Silver light began to dance around her hands as her wolf snarled with fury. The wall facing the gardens exploded inward in a shower of stone and mortar. Through the gap stepped Beta Marcus, but he was no longer the merely cruel man who had tormented Luna for 3 years. His eyes glowed with stolen magic, his form somehow larger and more threatening than any natural wolf could achieve. Behind him came dozens of rogues, their eyes reflecting that same unnatural light, their movements too coordinated for creatures that should have been mindless with rage. The ritual isn't complete, Marcus sneered, his gaze fixing on Luna with possessive hunger that made her skin crawl. I can smell it on you, power awakened but not fully bound. Which means she's still mine to claim. Damon stepped in front of Luna, his own power blazing to life as his alpha aura filled the room. You want her, he growled, his voice carrying the promise of violence. You'll have to go through me first. Marcus's laugh was the sound of breaking glass and dying hope. Oh, Blackwood. I was hoping you'd say that. The battle was about to begin. Chapter 6. The battle erupted with savage fury that shook the very foundations of the Blackwood estate. The moment Marcus's enhanced rogues poured through the destroyed wall, the elegant study transformed into a war zone of snarling wolves, flashing claws, and the metallic scent of spilled blood. Luna pressed herself against the far wall, her newly awakened power crackling around her like barely contained lightning as she watched the carnage unfold. Damon's pack members had responded to the Alpha's call with the loyalty of wolves who would die for their leader, but they were vastly outnumbered. For every Blackwood wolf, there were 3 rogues, and these weren't ordinary rogues driven mad by isolation and bloodlust. These creatures moved with unnatural coordination, their eyes glowing with the same stolen magic that enhanced Marcus's form. They were faster than any natural wolf, stronger than physics should have allowed, and when the Blackwood wolves' claws raked across their bodies, the wounds healed almost instantly. Dark magic, Luna realized with growing horror. He's turned them into monsters. Damon fought like the apex predator he was, his massive black wolf form a blur of deadly grace as he tore through rogues with practiced efficiency. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once, and Luna watched in growing terror as more and more of his pack members fell beneath the onslaught of enhanced claws and fangs. "Jake, fall back to the second line." Damon's voice rang out over the chaos, his alpha authority cutting through the sounds of battle. "Don't let them separate us." But the rogues seemed to anticipate every tactical move, flowing around the pack's defensive positions like water around stones. Luna saw Jake stumble as 3 rogues converged on him at once, his usually quick reflexes no match for their supernatural speed. It was then that she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Every wound the rogues inflicted was outlined in silver, not the pure silver of her bloodline, but something tainted and corrupt that spread through the injured wolf systems like poison. Poison claws. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos from somewhere near the shattered windows. The pack physician had taken shelter behind an overturned desk, her medical bag clutched to her chest as she shouted crucial information to the fighters. "They're using the same wolfsbane that was used on Luna. The wounds won't heal." Luna's heart clenched as understanding crashed over her. This was why the rogues' attacks were so devastating, why wounds that should have closed within minutes continued to bleed freely. Marcus hadn't just enhanced his army's strength and speed, he'd weaponized the very poison that had kept Luna weak and compliant for 3 years. She watched in mounting horror as her mate fought 3 rogues at once, his golden eyes blazing with fury as he tried to protect his pack. Blood streamed from wounds that should have healed instantly, the wolfsbane in the rogue's claws preventing his supernatural healing from functioning. Each slash of their claws left silver lines of corruption across his dark fur, and Luna could see him beginning to slow as the poison accumulated in his system. "He's going to die," the thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. "They're all going to die, and it's because of me. Because Marcus wants what I am." Magnificent, isn't it? Marcus's voice cut through her spiraling panic like a blade. The beta had been stalking through the battle like a predator savoring the hunt, his form beginning to shift into something that defied natural law. He was too large for any normal wolf, his limbs elongated and twisted, his features caught somewhere between human and animal in a way that violated every principle of shifter biology. "Your power will make me invincible," Marcus snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of dark magic and stolen strength. "And Blackwood will watch as I claim what's mine." Luna backed against the wall as he approached, her newly awakened power responding to her fear by crackling visibly around her hands. But she was untrained, uncertain, still learning to control abilities that her bloodline had spent generations perfecting. "I'm not yours," she said, forcing strength into her voice even as terror clawed at her throat. "I never was." Marcus's laugh was the sound of breaking bones and dying hope. "Oh, little Luna. You've been mine since the moment I dragged you from that forest. Every day I kept you weak, every night I reminded you of your place, all of it was preparing you for this moment." He lunged with inhuman speed, claws extended and glowing with dark magic that would tear her apart from the inside out. But as his corrupted power reached for her, something deeper than fear or desperation rose to the surface of Luna's consciousness. This was her pack now, her family, her mate bleeding and fighting for his life because she existed. The Moonfire bloodline hadn't become legendary through cowering in corners or allowing evil to triumph. No more, Luna thought with crystalline clarity. No more running. No more fear. No more being a victim. Her dormant power exploded to the surface like a dam bursting under pressure. Silver light erupted from her body with the force of a contained star going nova, throwing Marcus back across the room and sending his enhanced rogues flying like leaves in a hurricane. The light was pure in a way that made the corrupted magic recoil, beautiful and terrible and absolutely incorruptible. "I am Luna of the Moonfire bloodline," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of generations of powerful women who had stood against darkness and refused to yield. The silver light danced around her like living flame, and Luna felt the presence of her ancestors flowing through her, Elena Moonfire's wisdom, her grandmother's strength, the combined will of every Luna who had ever stood as the last line between light and shadow. "And you will not touch my mate." The tide of battle turned in an instant. The purifying light that flowed from Luna's body washed over the wounded Blackwood wolves, healing their wolfsbane poisoning and closing wounds that had been bleeding freely moments before. Jake surged back to his feet with renewed strength, his eyes blazing as he tore into the nearest rogue with savage efficiency. Marcus's enhanced army, which had seemed unstoppable moments before, began to crumble under the assault of Luna's power. The stolen magic that bound them together couldn't withstand the pure energy of her bloodline, and one by one, the rogues began to flee rather than face the light that burned away their artificial enhancements. But Marcus himself was different. Instead of being weakened by her power, he seemed to grow stronger, his twisted form absorbing the dark magic that fled from his failing army and using it to fuel his own transformation. "You're too late," he laughed maniacally, his voice echoing with the screams of every wolf whose power he'd stolen over the years. "I've already taken power from dozens of wolves. Your little light show can't stop me now." He was right, Luna realized with growing despair. Her power was pure but untrained, instinctive rather than controlled. She could heal her pack and drive away the lesser rogues, but Marcus had spent years accumulating stolen strength specifically for this moment. Every wolf he'd tortured, every power he'd claimed, every piece of magic he'd corrupted, it was all flowing into him now, making him something that transcended the natural order. "I'm not strong enough," she thought as Marcus advanced on her again, his form now so twisted by dark magic that she could barely recognize the beta who had tormented her for 3 years. "I need more power, more training, more." "Luna." Damon's voice cut through her despair like a lifeline. She turned to see her mate standing in the center of the chaos, his golden eyes fierce with love and determination despite the blood that stained his dark fur. "Take my power. All of it." The offer hit her like a physical blow. "No." Luna screamed, understanding immediately what he was suggesting. "That will kill you." Power sharing between mates was possible, but only in small amounts, temporary loans that could enhance abilities without permanent damage. What Damon was proposing, a complete transfer of his alpha strength, was unprecedented. It would leave him defenseless, possibly dead. "Trust me," Damon said, his voice carrying absolute conviction as he opened his mind to her completely. The mate bond that connected them blazed to life, and Luna felt his thoughts flowing into hers with crystal clarity. "We're mates. True mates can share power without loss. But only if you accept me completely." Through their bond, Luna could see what he meant. The ancient text spoke of legendary mate pairs who had achieved perfect synchronization, sharing power so completely that they became two aspects of a single supernatural force. It required absolute trust, perfect love, and a bond deeper than anything most wolves ever achieved. It also required her to drop every defense, every barrier, every wall she'd built to protect herself from further pain. She would have to trust him not just with her power, but with every broken piece of her soul. Marcus roared with rage and charged, his twisted form moving with the accumulated speed of dozens of stolen wolves. Dark magic crackled around his claws, and Luna could see her death reflected in his mad eyes. She had seconds to decide. "Trust," Damon's mental voice whispered through their bond. "Trust me, Luna. Trust us." Luna looked into her mate's golden eyes and saw 15 years of patient waiting, 3 years of desperate searching, and a love so profound it transcended every barrier that life had thrown between them. He had never failed her, never betrayed her trust, never been anything less than exactly what she needed him to be. "I accept," she thought, throwing open every mental barrier and offering him not just her power, but her heart, her soul, her absolute faith in their connection. The world exploded into golden and silver light as their powers merged with the force of worlds colliding. Luna felt Damon's alpha strength flowing into her even as her moonfire abilities wrapped around him in return. They were still separate beings, but also something infinitely more, a perfect synthesis of power that neither could have achieved alone. Marcus's charge faltered as the combined force of their merged abilities hit him like a tsunami of purified energy. For the first time since the battle began, uncertainty flickered in his mad eyes. But he was still moving, still dangerous, and Luna could feel that even their combined power might not be enough to stop someone who had spent years accumulating stolen magic. The final confrontation was about to begin. Chapter 7. Luna reached out through their mate bond and felt Damon's incredible alpha power flowing into her like molten gold through her veins. But something extraordinary happened, something that defied every law of supernatural physics she'd ever heard whispered in pack lore. Instead of weakening him as she absorbed his strength, their combined power grew exponentially, each ability amplifying the other until they became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The silver light that had been dancing around Luna's form suddenly blazed brilliant gold, shot through with veins of pure white that seemed to burn with the intensity of captured starlight. She could feel Damon's presence not just in her mind but in every cell of her body, his alpha dominance merging seamlessly with her moonfire heritage to create something that had never existed before. Perfect synchronization, she realized with wonder. This is what the ancient texts meant when they spoke of legendary mate pairs. Through their bond, she felt Damon's amazement echoing her own. He was still himself, still fully present and powerful, but now they were also something more, two halves of a whole that had finally achieved perfect balance. Impossible! Marcus screamed, his charge faltering as the golden light began burning away the stolen magic that had twisted his form beyond recognition. You can't have that much power. But even as he protested, Luna could see the dark magic that had made him into a monster beginning to unravel. The purifying light of their merged abilities didn't just heal, it restored, it corrected, it stripped away everything that was unnatural and wrong until only truth remained. This is the power of true mates, Luna said, her voice echoing with ancient authority that seemed to come from generations of moonfire women who had stood as guardians between light and darkness. Something you'll never understand. The golden light pulsed outward from their joined forms, and Luna felt her ancestors' presence flowing through her, not just Elena Moonfire's legendary strength, but the accumulated wisdom and power of every Luna who had ever sacrificed for her pack, who had ever stood against impossible odds and refused to yield. Marcus tried to maintain his monstrous form, clinging desperately to the stolen power that had sustained him, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. One by one, the pieces of magic he'd ripped from other wolves began to separate from his essence, drawn away by the irresistible pull of Luna's purifying light. And as each stolen fragment was stripped away, she could sense something else, the echoes of every wolf Marcus had tortured, every power he'd claimed, every life he'd destroyed in his quest for strength. The weight of that accumulated suffering should have crushed her, but instead it fueled her determination to see justice done. The final confrontation was swift but devastating. Marcus lunged one last time, his claws still wreathed in the tattered remnants of dark magic, but Luna and Damon moved as one. Their combined power struck him like a tsunami of purified energy, and Marcus's stolen strength turned against him as Luna's light stripped away every piece of magic he'd taken. Without the artificial enhancements that had sustained him for years, Marcus collapsed like a marionette with severed strings. The creature who had terrorized Luna for 3 years, who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just moments before, was revealed to be nothing more than a broken, aging wolf whose own inadequacies had driven him to monstrous acts. He lay crumpled at Luna's feet, his form finally returned to its natural state, smaller than she remembered, older, somehow diminished by the absence of the power that had defined him for so long. His eyes, no longer glowing with stolen magic, looked up at her with an expression that might have been shock. "Please," Marcus whimpered, his voice cracking with the weight of sudden vulnerability. He looked small and pathetic, nothing like the monster who had haunted Luna's nightmares. I wanted to be strong." For the first time since seeing him again, Luna felt something other than hatred or fear. Looking down at this broken creature who had caused so much pain, she felt the stirring of an emotion she'd never expected, pity. Strength isn't taken, Marcus, she said quietly, her voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who had discovered her own power through love rather than theft. It's earned through sacrifice, through protecting those who depend on you, through choosing to do what's right even when it costs you everything. She gestured to the devastation around them, the shattered walls, the injured pack members who were only now beginning to heal, the lingering traces of dark magic that would take time to fully cleanse from the estate. Look what your stolen power brought you, Luna continued. Isolation, madness, the hatred of everyone who might have cared about you. Was it worth it? Was the illusion of strength worth becoming the kind of monster that children have nightmares about? Marcus had no answer. He simply lay there, staring up at her with eyes that held the hollow emptiness of someone who had finally realized the true cost of his choices. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the destroyed windows, pack members who had survived the battle began to emerge from their defensive positions. Jake limped forward, his wounds already healing thanks to Luna's purifying light, leading a group of wolves who moved with the efficient purpose of those trained to handle crisis situations. Take him into custody, Damon ordered, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha whose territory had been violated. He'll face judgment before the Council of Alphas. What about the surviving rogues? Jake asked, gesturing toward the handful of enhanced wolves who had been captured rather than killed during the battle. Luna studied the prisoners with her newly awakened senses and felt a surge of compassion that surprised her. They're not responsible for their actions, she said. The magic that enhanced them also controlled them. With time and proper treatment, they can be rehabilitated. It was a merciful judgment, but Luna could feel the rightness of it in her bones. These wolves had been victims as much as weapons, stolen from their own packs and twisted into instruments of Marcus's will. They deserved a chance at redemption. As the immediate crisis was handled and the estate began the long process of recovery, Luna became aware of something else, a presence in the air that made her newly awakened instincts sing with joy. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable beneath the lingering traces of battle and magic, but growing stronger with each passing moment. Damon, she whispered, looking up at the full moon that still hung in the lightning sky like a silver guardian watching over them. Do you feel that? He nodded, his arm tightening around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and celebratory. The pack, he said, wonder creeping into his voice. They're calling to you. Not just as my mate, but as their Luna. Even as he spoke, Luna could hear it beginning, a low, musical note that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. One by one, every wolf in the territory began to howl, their voices joining in a song of acceptance, of recognition, of welcome for their true Luna. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, carrying harmonies that spoke of loyalty freely given rather than demanded, of a pack that had found its missing piece and was whole once again. Luna felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the magnitude of what was happening washed over her. This wasn't just acknowledgement of her power or her position as Damon's mate. This was something far more profound, a recognition of her right to lead, her worthiness to protect, her place as the heart of something larger than herself. They're accepting me, she breathed, her voice filled with wonder. Really accepting me. They see what I've always seen, Damon said softly, his golden eyes reflecting the silver light of the moon. Not just your power, but your heart. The way you chose mercy over vengeance, healing over destruction. That's what makes a true Luna. The howling continued, spreading beyond the immediate territory as neighboring packs picked up the song and added their voices to the celebration. Luna could feel the recognition flowing through the supernatural network that connected all wolves, carrying news of the Moonfire Luna's return to every corner of the continent. But even as she basked in the joy of acceptance, Luna sensed that something more was coming. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility, pregnant with a change that would affect not just her and Damon, but their entire future. There's something else, she said, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her stomach. Something. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the impossible hope that was blooming in her chest. But as the pack's song of welcome reached its crescendo, Luna felt a tiny spark of life beginning to kindle within her, a presence so small and precious that she hardly dared believe it was real. The biggest surprise was yet to come, but Luna could feel it approaching like dawn after the longest night, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and a future brighter than anything she'd ever dared to dream. Chapter 8. 3 months had passed since the battle that changed everything, and the Blackwood estate had been transformed into something that belonged in fairy tales. Silver and gold decorations adorned every surface, catching the afternoon sunlight and casting prismatic rainbows across marble halls that had been meticulously restored after Marcus's attack. Ancient wolf banners hung from the rafters, their rich fabrics telling the story of alliances that stretched back centuries, while garlands of moonflowers, blooms that only opened under Luna's influence, draped the doorways like nature's own blessing. Luna stood before the ancient altar that had been erected in the estate's grand ballroom, her reflection caught in mirrors that seemed to multiply her image into infinity. The woman looking back at her bore no resemblance to the broken slave who had knelt on an auction platform just months before. This Luna was radiant, powerful, every inch the queen she'd been born to become. Her silver hair had grown longer, flowing like liquid moonlight down her back and crowned with a delicate circlet of smaller moonstones that caught the light with every movement. The ceremonial gown she wore was a masterpiece of ancient tradition and modern elegance, white silk that seemed to glow with inner light, embroidered with silver threads that traced patterns older than memory. But it was her eyes that truly marked the transformation, emerald depths that sparkled with confidence, wisdom, and a power that had finally found its proper home. The ballroom itself could barely contain the crowd that had gathered to witness this historic moment. Hundreds of werewolves from across the continent had come to see the rise of the most powerful Luna in generations. Alphas who commanded territories larger than small countries sat beside betas whose loyalty had been earned through blood and sacrifice. Even the ancient council of elders had emerged from their mountain sanctuary, their presence lending gravity to an occasion that would be remembered for centuries. Elder Matthias, his beard white as winter snow and his eyes holding the wisdom of 800 years, stood before the altar with the ceremonial scroll that contained vows unchanged since the first pacts were formed. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of history and the promise of future. "We gather today not just to witness a coronation," he began, his words echoing through the vast space with supernatural clarity, "but to celebrate the return of a bloodline thought lost forever. The Moonfire line has been absent from our world for too long, and today we welcome home a daughter whose very existence makes us all stronger." Luna felt the truth of those words resonate in her bones. Through the great windows, she could see pack members from dozens of territories camping on the estate grounds, their presence a testament to the unity her emergence had fostered. Old feuds had been set aside, ancient grudges forgotten, as the supernatural world recognized that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. "Luna Moonfire," Elder Matthias continued, his ancient eyes meeting hers with profound respect, "you have already proven yourself in battle, shown mercy to your enemies, and demonstrated the wisdom that marks a true leader. But formal recognition requires formal vows. Do you, Luna Moonfire, accept the responsibility of Luna to the Blackwood Pack and all allied territories?" The question hung in the air like a living thing, carrying weight that went far beyond simple words. Luna was being asked to bind herself not just to Damon and his pack, but to become a cornerstone of supernatural society, a leader whose decisions would affect millions of wolves across multiple continents. "I do," Luna replied, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd with the clear certainty of someone who had found her true purpose. "I accept the responsibility to lead with wisdom, to protect with courage, and to serve with humility. I pledge my power to the defense of all who would call me Luna, and my heart to the welfare of every wolf who looks to me for guidance." The formal words felt right on her lips, as though she'd been practicing them her entire life. Through the mate bond, she felt Damon's pride and love flowing into her like warm honey, strengthening her resolve and reminding her that she would never again face any challenge alone. Damon stepped forward then, carrying the Luna crown that had been waiting for her for 15 years. It was a masterpiece of supernatural craftsmanship, a circlet of silver so pure it seemed to glow with inner light, set with moonstones that had been mined from sacred caves and blessed by generations of Luna priestesses. The moment Luna saw it, she knew it had been made specifically for her, crafted by artisans who had somehow foreseen her eventual rise to power. "And do you, Alpha Damon Blackwood?" Elder Matthias asked, turning his attention to the man who had searched for Luna across 15 years of heartbreak and hope, "accept Luna as your equal partner in all things? Do you pledge to honor her wisdom, support her decisions, and stand beside her as an equal rather than above her as a master?" Damon's golden eyes never left Luna's as he answered, his voice carrying absolute conviction. I do. She was never my slave, she was always my queen. From the moment I first saw her as a child, I knew she was destined for greatness. Everything I am, everything I have built, belongs to her as much as it belongs to me. The words sent a shiver of emotion through the assembled crowd. Many of them had heard the story by now, how Luna had been stolen as a child, hidden and suppressed for years, only to emerge at an auction where her destined mate had been waiting to claim her. It was the stuff of legends, a love story that would be told around pack fires for generations. As the crown settled on Luna's head, something extraordinary happened. Her power, which had been carefully controlled since the battle with Marcus, suddenly pulsed outward in waves that washed over every wolf in attendance. It wasn't overwhelming or frightening, instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding a missing piece of themselves they hadn't realized was gone. Pack members who had been nursing old injuries found themselves suddenly healed. Wolves who had been struggling with the depression that sometimes accompanied isolation felt their spirits lifting. Even the ancient grudges between certain families seemed to fade as Luna's influence reminded them of what truly mattered, the bonds that held their people together rather than the differences that drove them apart. "Behold," Elder Matthias announced, his voice ringing with triumph, "Luna of the Moonfire bloodline, rightful queen of the Western Territories and guardian of the old ways. May her reign bring peace to the restless, healing to the wounded, and hope to all who have lost their way." The crowd erupted in celebration that could be heard for miles. Howls of joy echoed across the estate grounds as wolves in both human and animal form expressed their acceptance of their new Luna. Fireworks began exploding overhead, not mundane pyrotechnics, but magical displays that painted the sky in silver and gold, creating images of running wolves and soaring eagles that danced among the clouds. But for Luna, the most meaningful moment came during the feast that followed the ceremony. Tables had been set up throughout the estate, groaning under the weight of delicacies from every pack territory represented. Wine flowed like water, laughter filled the air, and for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the supernatural world felt truly united. Luna sat at the head table beside Damon, accepting congratulations from an endless stream of well-wishers, when Dr. Chen approached with a smile that held secrets. "Congratulations, Luna," the pack physician said quietly, leaning close enough that her words wouldn't carry to curious ears. "On both the coronation and the pregnancy." Luna's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "What?" Dr. Chen's smile widened. "About 6 weeks along, I'd estimate. The power sharing during the battle must have triggered it. Supernatural conception often happens during moments of intense magical synchronization. You're going to have a very special pup." The words hit Luna like a thunderbolt. She'd been so focused on learning to control her newfound abilities, on preparing for the coronation and adjusting to her role as Luna, that she hadn't paid attention to the subtle changes in her body. But now that Dr. Chen mentioned it, she could feel it, a tiny spark of life growing within her, a perfect blend of alpha and Luna power that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Damon's champagne glass shattered in his grip as joy overwhelmed his supernatural control. "A pup?" he breathed, his golden eyes wide with wonder. "Really?" Luna placed her hand over her still flat stomach, reaching out with her newfound senses to touch the miracle growing there. The life force she felt was impossibly strong for something so small, a being that would combine the best of both bloodlines and possibly surpass even Luna's considerable abilities. "A pup," she confirmed, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Our pup." The news spread through the celebration like wildfire, and soon the entire assembly was toasting not just their new Luna, but the heir who would carry on both the Blackwood and Moonfire legacies. Pack members who had waited generations for such an event wept openly, understanding that they were witnessing the beginning of a new golden age. From slave to mother, Luna marveled, leaning into Damon's embrace as their pack celebrated around them. Who would have thought? Damon pulled her into his arms, spinning her around despite the formal setting and the watching crowd. His laughter was pure joy, the sound of a man who had finally found everything he'd ever wanted. "I knew from the moment I heard your voice at that auction," he whispered against her ear, his words meant for her alone. "You were never meant to be anyone's slave. You were meant to be a queen." Luna laughed, the sound pure and joyful as crystal bells. "And you, my alpha, were meant to be my king." As fireworks continued to explode overhead and the pack celebrated around them, Luna allowed herself to reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. From the cold stone of an auction platform to the warmth of a throne, from the broken slave who had begged to be bought to the powerful Luna who now commanded the respect of supernatural society across multiple continents. The scars were still there, they would always be there, reminders of the darkness she'd endured and overcome. But they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as testament to her strength, proof that even the most brutal attempts to break her spirit had ultimately failed. She thought of Marcus, now imprisoned and awaiting judgment from the Council of Alphas. Even for him, she felt no hatred, only pity for a broken soul who had chosen theft over earning, cruelty over kindness. His fate was no longer her concern. Her focus was on the future she was building with Damon, the pack she would lead with wisdom and compassion, and the child who would grow up knowing only love and acceptance. Sometimes, Luna reflected as she watched her people celebrate the beginning of a new era, the most beautiful stories really did begin with the darkest moments. Sometimes the auction block became a throne room, and sometimes the slave became the queen. And sometimes, when you thought you were begging to be saved, you were really just calling out to the one person who had been searching for you all along, the other half of your soul who would spend eternity proving that you were worth every moment of the wait. I know you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. If you have thoughts, do well to drop them in the comments section below, and share this video to family and friends. The end.